Do you fly and are concerned about your climate emissions but don't know what to do? Do you wonder what airlines are doing to reduce their emissions? You see signs at the airport or messages from your airline about offsetting your carbon emissions and wonder if it's worth the money. If you're asking any of these questions, then you're in the right place. I'm Andy Silber, and this is Decarbonize, and welcome to part 1 of my series on aviation. The EPA reports that commercial airplanes and large business jets contribute 10% of U.S. transportation emissions, which is 3% of the nation's total greenhouse gas production. And this sector is hard to decarbonize. If you want to reduce the impact of electricity, you can install solar panels. If you want to reduce the impact of heating, go with a heat pump. Ground transportation, you can walk, bike, bus, drive an EV. My personal preference is an e-bike. But for flying, you as an individual might not have any options other than not traveling. You might be able to drive, but it's less safe and takes much longer. And if your destination is an ocean away, then that's not even an option. If a train is an option, like in Europe and parts of Asia, that's a great way to go. But in the US and Canada, trains are rarely an option, and when they are, they're often slower than a bus and more expensive than flying. But as a society, we do have some actions we can take. In this video, I'm going to share the story of how Boeing dropped the idea of building a fast plane and instead ushered in a new age of more efficient aircraft. At the same time, Airbus took a different, less efficient path, and shockingly, the more efficient path won out. One thing that helps is that an airline's success is linked to reducing fuel consumption. Since 20 to 30% of their costs are fuel, the airline that reduces fuel costs will have lower ticket prices and be more successful. And burning less fuel means reduced carbon emissions. In 2001, Boeing announced the Sonic Cruiser concept, a commercial jet that would use advanced materials like carbon fiber reinforced composites to reduce weight and advanced engine design that would produce more thrust with less fuel. These advances would allow the Sonic Cruiser to travel just below the speed of sound while burning the same amount of fuel as a standard plane traveling at 85% of the speed of sound, the typical speed of a commercial jet. The interest in the Sonic Cruiser was weak, with most airlines telling Boeing they were more interested in a fuel-efficient jet than a fast one. Given the amount of time spent loading, unloading, cleaning, and servicing a jet, the increased speed in the air didn't make that big of a difference in the economics, but burning less fuel would. So in 2002, Boeing dropped the Sonic Cruiser and began developing the 7E7, where the E stood for efficiency. Boeing utilized all the technology they had to produce the most efficient commercial jet plane ever. In 2011, the 787-8, with about 240 seats, was certified for service by the FAA. Meanwhile, Airbus had launched the A380 with at least 540 seats in 2005. The A380 was designed not to be fuel efficient, but to deal with busy airports that were running out of takeoff and landing slots. Its large size meant that the A380 could only fly into 140 airports that had reconfigured their runways and built gates designed specifically for these large jets. The A380 was conceived around a hub and spoke view of the network, and the large size meant that it was primarily for flying from hub to hub. People would take a regional jet to their nearest hub, unless they lived near one, and then they would fly to the hub nearest their destination, and possibly take a third flight from that hub to their destination. For instance, when my family flew to Australia from Seattle, we first flew to LAX, where people from all over the US were herded onto an A380 bound for Melbourne. Our flight home from Western Australia took 4 legs. Most airlines had little interest in the A380. It was just too big. Over a quarter of all A380 flights are out of a single airport, Dubai, and a single airline, Emirates, flew over half of the A380s. Boeing's smaller 787 has regularly scheduled flights into almost 300 airports. Tokyo's Haneda Airport alone had over 1,100 flights in a single month. Since the 787 is smaller and can fly into almost any airport, you're more likely to be able to get to where you want in fewer flights. Boeing's point-to-point approach, rather than a hub-and-spoke approach, meant that on average people were getting where they wanted to go faster and by flying fewer miles, meaning the 787 fleet was more fuel efficient as a plane and enabled a more efficient network. This is important, so I want to repeat it. A hub and a spoke model is less efficient because people are flying a greater distance to go where they want. Both airplanes make sense on some routes, but there are many fewer routes that make sense for the A380. And in 2021, Airbus discontinued production after delivering only 251 planes. In contrast, Boeing has delivered over 1,100 787s as of January 2024, and production continues. Since the launch of the 787, efficiency has become the name of the game for all new planes. Looking at this graph of the per-seat fuel consumption of planes by year of certification, we see a clear break in the early 2000s. All of the newer planes have lower fuel consumption than the best plane from before, and the trend for both Boeing and Airbus is continuing better and better fuel efficiency. I've labeled the A380 in red, and you see that even though it was big, its per-seat fuel consumption was just okay for the time. On the bottom right, you'll see the 787-10 in blue, the latest and most efficient variant. For those considering driving, I've included the first generation Prius with 2 people in green. You'd need to have 4 people in the car to beat a 787-10, so driving in a half-empty car is less efficient than flying in a full plane non-stop. So when booking a flight, the best way to reduce your impact is to reduce the amount of time you'll be in the air. Non-stops are the most efficient. If you do have to make a stop, make sure it's on the way. Also, if you can pick an airline with newer planes, feel comfortable in knowing that all the airlines are motivated to be flying the most fuel-efficient airplanes. If you've enjoyed this, please like and subscribe and share with anyone you know who flies a lot. Next up will be sustainable aviation fuels.